Hello, everybody. I'm Frank Stanishi of Open Forum, candid, frank, and live, of course. Welcome to the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure you rate and leave a comment. Both apps are absolutely free. Zingo TV is available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 forward. Now, joining me on Open Forum is Lily Cheng, running for councilor representing Willowdale, which is Ward 18 in Toronto. Lily, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Hi, Frank. Nice to meet you too.
Well, I see some good news here from the Toronto Star. We'll start right with the good news. What do you think? Apparently, you're leading the battle for the seat.
I don't know if I would call 1% lead good news,
Uh,
but
well, I think it's better than a certain amount behind. So,
that's true. That's
so
true. It
let,
shows I'm putting up a good fight.
yeah, let's talk about Lily Cheng. You're a daughter of immigrants. Maybe we'll go one step at a time. So, what does being a daughter of I'm a son of immigrants. So, but for you, in your own words, what helped you be and what were the good things you had about being an immigrant and from your view?
Well, I think, most immigrants would see that our parents had to work very hard. You can't take anything for granted. Nothing is handed to you. And there was a tremendous amount of sacrifice that allowed me to ask, what do I want to do with my life? Because I don't think my parents had that choice. Their main focus was survival and putting down roots so that my sister and I could have a chance to pursue our dreams. So, to me, the word immigrant means hard work and sacrifice.
And that sacrifice is mostly because you're really not sure. When what I learned from my parents is that your social life really, it's not that it suffers, but it takes a back seat to having a home. And considering my parents didn't have much when they came here, they had to work really hard to create the home in a strange place, doing things with people that you don't really know. It's really a baptism by fire, isn't it?
Yes, I think you're navigating a world that you don't speak the, main language. And at the time, there was no internet. So it's not like you could just Google where to go. And there's a lot of trial and error. My mom, studied business administration and worked in business, but when she came to Canada, she ended up working in a factory for all of her life. So that it was definitely not the preferred career for her, but it was how she could best provide for the family.
We spend a lot of time thinking about politics, thinking how politicians can help us. You're a wife, you're a mom, you're a passionate community organizer. Tell us about being a wife and a mom, and how that reflects on your running here and your motivation.
Well, I think what I realized is that as a new immigrant, my parents never taught us about politics. They didn't get involved in politics, right? Because it's all about survival. And so when you're focused on survival, then it means that you're not in tune with what's happening and you don't have a voice. So decisions that are being made don't actually reflect your perspective of the world. And as I was growing up, I started to realize that, as a visible minority, there were places where my voice was not being represented. So now, as a mom, and I look at my kids growing up, I feel like, well, if our leadership continues to look and sound a certain way, think a certain way, and is not really necessarily representative of the diversity of our city, what that makes me feel is, how can I tell my kids that your voices matter too, that you can do anything that you want? Because if we see glass ceilings, or and for Chinese people, sometimes we call it the bamboo ceiling, then we can feel like our voices don't matter. So to me, that's what I'm fighting for. And it's not just to represent, Chinese people per se, but when you know that feeling of being silenced or suppressed, you fight all the more to make sure you hear everyone's voices, because you know what it feels like. So I'm fighting because I want all the people in my community to feel like their voice has a chance to be heard.
And that requires, because of, in a way, as a child of immigrants, there's a form of insecurity that is built in the cake because you watch television, you don't feel like you relate with what's going on television. You look around the community, you don't feel you relate. So you can be empathetic about new Canadians coming to a community, and but that doesn't mean, does it? I don't think it means that you can't understand what born Canadians here, or people who've been here for generations, because what we all want is essentially the same thing. I think sometimes we're distracted by what we look like in the mirror.
100%. And actually, it's quite heartbreaking to me going door to door and realizing how little connection there is across language and culture in our neighborhood. So, Willowdale is 67% visible minorities. And when I go in a condo, it really striking when you go from door to door and the door opens and it's like a whole different universe. Each door is a different universe. You open one door, you hear K-pop, and maybe you smell some Korean food. You open another door, you smell Indian food, and but these neighbors, they don't know each other. There is no, when I ask them, they actually don't have a relationship with each other, and to me, that is one of the most heartbreaking things. And so, as leaders, it's all the more important that we're intentional, not just about crossing the language and culture barrier, but building bridges between the cultures and and overcoming the barriers.
Part of your one of the things that you founded was North York Moms. Doesn't matter what background you have, a mom is a mom. Tell us about that organization and why it was so important to you to start.
So, when I was pregnant with my first child, my mom passed away, and that was a really hard loss. I didn't have a village when I had my son, so I felt very lonely, and I would see other moms on the street when I went out for a walk, and I realized that we're all feeling isolated because I'd see the same loneliness in the eyes of the moms that I walk by. And I thought, we really need to share this journey. There's no reason why we can't. So I started a group with 10 moms, and the intention was to share encouragement, share resources, and to organize some meetups. And I still remember the first meetup I organized. It was a rainy day and no one showed up. So that was the first kick at the can. But now, 9 years later, the group is almost 11,000 members strong. And we have done tremendous work. Because what happens when people come together is they help each other. So we have helped single moms in crisis. We've helped women leaving abusive marriages. And we also have sponsored a refugee family. So not only have we helped each other, the help has extended beyond our group.
Yeah, and speaking of being a mom, also you've developed a little bit of a mom attitude towards Willowdale because you love Willowdale, another group that you started.
Yeah, so We Love Willowdale was founded the night of the Young Street tragedy. It was a heartbreaking night, and a group of us got together and thought, our neighborhood is going to need to heal from this trauma. So we co-founded We Love Willowdale. We had a prayer walk and vigil the following night. Then we organized this huge march called Reclaim Young, because we needed to reclaim our neighborhood for ourselves, to take away that violent memory that had now been etched into our hearts. And 10,000 people showed up for that walk. It was really healing, I think, for a lot of people to share that. And actually, that journey really propelled me in a way to run for the first time. I hadn't really thought about politics, but when I saw the power of people coming together to do good, and I thought, what if politics could be like this? Not just about having an agenda or getting your way, but it could be defined by people coming together for a positive reason. And during the first few weeks after the tragedy, it was really striking how on the streets, people talk to each other. Usually, when we're on Young Street, people are on their phones or with their headphones on, and no one really talks to each other. But for the first few weeks after the tragedy, you would see people reaching out across culture, across language, just saying, "How are you doing? Where were you that day?" And my hope was that we would keep that awareness and intention of caring for our neighbors.
That's a primary thing when it comes to healing, and one of the goals that you had. But overall, you like the idea of, as a concept in the community, having community healing. That's a big thing. But what are some of the other things that you think healing is adaptable and helpful in communities?
Well, I think in the act of giving, it can also be very healing, right? Because you're no longer just focused on your own pain. You share and connect with other people's pain. And so for us, We Love Willowdale created an opportunity where people could give back by, uh, helping to serve a community dinner that we hosted, or participating in the walk, or just reaching out to a neighbor who needed something. And so, it was under actually the We Love Willowdale umbrella that during COVID, I started the Willowdale COVID Response Network, because I heard that there were seniors who couldn't get their groceries. And so we put out a call who wanted to volunteer. And, on the one hand, there was all this unknown risk with COVID. But on the other hand, people felt so hopeless and they needed to feel like they could do something. So we quickly grew to a volunteer team of 100 people in our neighborhood, and we help seniors, we help vulnerable people or those who are immune compromised get their groceries or medication. And I think, again, like, the giving was part of the healing.
It's a very important part of life. There's a lot that we can learn, and you've told us some stuff that you've learned, some putting groups together and stuff. But one of the big things that we need to learn, and how can you teach us when it comes to education? What do you see as the lesson and the position of counselor when it comes to education?
Well, definitely, building strong relationship with the trustees who represent the community, because it's their role really to speak into education and be a bridge between the community, but also advocating, in particular, for more school capacity, more school spaces. And one thing that I would really like to do is to add at least one more school to our community. Willowdale is really maxed out in terms of infrastructure. We have many condos. When they go up, there's a sign by their sales office that says, the children who live here will not be able to attend local schools. So a lot of the condos, the kids are bussed out to other areas. And there's a real challenge with the funding formula, which means that as long as there is space in a TDSB school, it doesn't matter if that space is not within the community where we live, they won't add new schools. So that means that the push is for when we keep stretching our growth, our population growth, then a lot of the newer Willowdalers who live in the new builds, they have to be bussed out. And there is an old maintenance building that is on the edge of Avondale Public School. And a few years ago, the previous trustee had tried to advocate for it to become a high school. So, given our density and our tremendous growth. And just actually a couple years ago, Avondale was rebuilt. For a few years, the kids all had to get bussed out while they built a brand new school. And within a year, the school is already using portables again. So that's just the population growth pressure. And so if we can take that maintenance building and that space and make it a high school, but how we could perhaps entice the school board to invest in this, and the province is, we could invest in, and the city could pay for a community center to be part of the school construction. So it'd be a hybrid school and community center. And increasingly, I think that's the model we should be applying to all schools, because school space is precious. It's, for many people, it's the closest public space. Well, it's not public, but it's, taxpayer paid space. And if school space was more affordable and accessible in evenings and weekends, we could have a lot more programming, community building initiatives. So we really need to advocate for, and there are a few of these hybrid models downtown, but I think in Willowdale, every time we look at creating a new school, or if we are going to renovate a school, we should look at the possibility of including a community center. And that will also reduce traffic, because if we think about it right now, and actually right now in Willowdale, there's only one community center that's actually running full programs this fall, because Goulding is under construction right now. They're doing renovation, and Mitchellfield is currently a vaccine clinic. So we only have Edithvale, and think about our population, 118,000 people. So anyone who wants programs in our community has to drive out, and so if we could walk to programs, which I think every family dreams of having that, we would reduce a lot of traffic in our neighborhood.
There's also, I see what you're saying, and sometimes I think children in buses, it's learning about commuting too early in life. You spend a lot of time in a car or a vehicle in the case of children, and that's lost time where they get to be children. Instead, they're basically like cattle taken from one place to the next. So I see what you're saying. I like what you're saying. When we talk about schools and education, we're talking about children. You brought up the fact that with schools, there could also be seniors. I know of senior programs that take place there. That's what community centers are for. If you don't have one or the other, it causes a bit of a problem. And if you only have one, that means you don't have many options or many choices. You do believe then that it's important, culturally speaking, and not necessarily Chinese, or in my case, Italian. It's about culturally becoming a part of the culture that is local, right? That's how you learn about local culture, is being in those same places. It's like you were saying about walking by people. If you have community centers, people get to know each other. Even people who are the same, who may not even know that they're close by. It's an opportunity for growth, right? And I think that's what you're getting at, right? The personal growth that people can have.
Yes, and actually, I've heard, certain spaces be described as bumping spaces.
Right.
You want to design a city that has many bumping places so that people can intentionally build relationships with their neighbors. And when I was canvassing the other day, I ran into an Italian nonna,
Yeah.
and she said to me that her and her friends play bingo in the park. And recently they had to stop because the park is under renovation. So even just for them not having a secondary space where they could play their bingo meant that their social interaction has been reduced, which is really unfortunate because I don't think any senior should be staying at home because there's no alternative for them to meet somewhere.
See, everything we're talking about right now, which is basically being in the community, getting to know the people that are around, bumping like you talked about. The opposite of that is, I believe, is crime. Crime happens because people don't know other people. It's easy to slip into a place where it's us and them when you don't recognize the we. Um, Tell me about crime and how you see it being treated by you.
Well, so first of all, they say there's been a saying that I actually really believe in, that loneliness is the root of all addiction. There is an incredible rise in addiction right now, and that can lead to mental health issues and it can lead to crime. And we have seen a rise in our neighborhood since the 5800 Young Street refugee shelter was converted into a homeless shelter. There has been a rise in the presence of people who unfortunately need a lot more help than what is being provided. So, one of my I think on my platform, and one of the things that I would take action on immediately if I win the elections is to have an emergency community town hall, because up until now, no one is willing to talk about this issue. And I say no one, no one in an official capacity. So there was an online discussion, a town hall about the other shelter that they're opening at 3 Park Home, the Novotel Hotel, which will become a refugee shelter for 700 people. And I expressed my reservations, not because I don't want to help refugees, but because the shelter at 5800 Young Street had also been a refugee shelter and converted to a homeless shelter without any conversations with the community. And I know that their trepidation is that they don't want to tell us because no one wants a homeless shelter in their neighborhood. So they just, instead of engaging in honest conversation, they just tried to slide one in, and
Mm.
we noticed, people noticed. So I said on the town hall, you know, because of that homeless shelter, I'm hearing about women in particular being harassed, assaulted, and threatened. And I was accused by our current city councilor of manufacturing lies. And that to me is unacceptable, because I think some people say that every community has to do their part. That's why we need to spread around these homeless shelters. But what I would say is, oftentimes when we're doing our part, it's at the expense of women, seniors, and children. When I go door to door, I hear women tell me they don't no longer feel safe walking home from the subway station. They're not walking certain routes. They don't let their children ride their bikes anymore. And I think about some of the women who have been assaulted. And anytime you're assaulted, that's a trauma that you carry for a long time. So for us to be flippant about it or deny its existence, it's not helpful, and in fact makes the problem even worse, because then we can't actually have a pathway to solving the problem. So in order to solve a problem, you have to talk about it. And then I get attacked for, conflating homelessness with refugees or for blaming homeless people, but I'm not blaming homeless people. I run a charity. I care about vulnerable people. I want everyone to have a chance to fulfill their potential. But we need to figure out, okay, why are these particular people who clearly have serious needs in relating to mental health and addiction? And I don't think congregating 150 of them into a shelter is the pathway for them to get better. So for just the parking them somewhere in large congregate settings, I think we actually set them up for failure because I've talked to, one of the residents who lives at 5800 Young, and he said, when he goes home to the shelter to sleep, he has to navigate a very complex environment. There are drug users and drug dealers who live in the shelter. So that's why a lot of encampments happen, because a lot of the homeless population, they don't want to live in a shelter because it feels unsafe. So we can't have these large congregate settings without thinking about what is a good and support. What kind of support do we need to advocate for? And here's where the provincial government really needs to step up, because mental health and addiction is under our health ministry. So our Ministry of Health has to really increase the type of services that is being funded so that these people get the help that they need.
When you started, you talked about basically in the shadow of night, these places appearing. So if I understand you, and you were talking about you're not against it. Part of the problem is that these places pop up, and what happens is the community's not ready for it, not aware of it. But I think you also made us aware that sometimes when the communities find out about it, they actually rebuff it and really don't want to have it there. So what's a solution down the road that you see that for these people who are homeless, these people are like, and then we're talking about refugees as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do we solve that problem then? Do you have a way that you can communicate with the rest of the counselors and say, I'm getting the message I'm getting, I guess I'm struggling with, is that when you have too many together, it becomes something that's not good for itself either, because you mentioned
Mm-hmm.
the people within the larger group don't
Mm-hmm.
feel comfortable. So what do you see as the solution?
So, BC is ahead of us in terms of implementing supportive housing. And there was recently an article in the Globe and Mail where they have identified there is this 20 to 25% of the homeless population for whom simply providing housing for them is not enough, because when they go into housing, they cause disruptions that make it hard to keep them in housing, and they end up circling back into tent encampments. So to me, we can't look at the homeless population as one uniform demographic. It isn't. And if we do that, we do a disservice to them. So just like, if you have, cancer, or if you have diabetes, or if you have, whatever ailment you have, there are specialists for that particular ailment. And right now, from what I can see, most of the homeless programs are broad strokes, put everyone in one place, and you can't differentiate them. So to me, we need to identify, like, who are the ones who need special intense support, and they have to go to a different kind of support place. And actually, that would make it easier to support the ones that are simply just having a hard moment in life. Um, because the ones that are having just that hard moment and they need a leg up, I think putting them in larger, housing situations would be okay, less intense. But when you put everyone together, it is not favorable for anyone, really. So, and then I also think that the smaller scale supportive housing model is something that is proven to work. There are many charities that use that model for homeless people as well as for refugees. And the key is the level of support that is provided. And so there's this amazing charity in Willowdale called CHIRS. I think it's the Canadian Institute for Head Injuries Resources. And they have clients who, they were deemed to probably die in a coma. They were previously in comas, they suddenly wake up, but they will never go back to being what they were before they had their head injury. So they end up in special housing. And one of the workers that I talked to described how they really, and the word he used is scaffold, they scaffold the community so that they're able to be a community, but it takes people around them to hold them in a space that works for everyone. And I think that's a beautiful model. I would love to see that model multiplied, not just for people with head injuries, but for people with mental health, with addiction, or I think that even people living in poverty, the ones that we serve, some of them would really benefit if the communities were scaffolded more than just putting a complex population in a large congregate setting without any support.
It's the opposite of integration. It's basically, yeah. I guess to your point, what I'm hearing is that if you have a big group of people with a few common problems, if you pull those people out and bring them somewhere, as you to use your analogy, where the people who take care of people with diabetes, you put them there, and then you have people who have issues with long-term injuries that force them to be taken care of in a different way, and you put them together, that big group becomes much smaller. And you might find that big group starts to have a lot more commonality. And I think we're back to that subject where people who understand each other get along better. If they don't I think that's what I was hearing from you, that people in a group where they don't feel like they're understood or they understand the larger group feel uncomfortable. So that scaffolding that you're talking about sounds like a good idea. That's good forward thinking. So with gun violence, recently we had a Toronto police officer killed. Basically, from what I understand, if reports are correct, because somebody wanted to take his gun, just because of that reason alone. Um, Gun violence is something that in our community. How is it in your community, and what do you think needs to be done?
So, yeah, actually, a couple weeks ago, there was a shooting at Church and Willowdale Avenue, and I believe it was targeted. So, there were several rounds fired, more than 12, and we are so grateful that, random bullets didn't end up hurting anyone and no one was killed. So, although one person was injured, no one died. But I think gun violence is very complex. There's not one solution that you can implement that's going to solve it. But at the root of it is poverty. So kids who grow up in poverty, who are not invested in, not supported, it's very easy to find your value and calling in a gang where you feel like you're part of something and you can make a living. And so I see kids in our community who I believe are seriously under invested in. And actually on my platform, one of the things that I want to advocate for is to send parks and recreation programs into community housing neighborhoods, because right now it's so competitive to get a spot in parks and rec programming that for most, single mom families, of who many of them do live in the community housing neighborhood where we serve, they can't compete for those spots. And so And if you have several children and you're a single mom and you're working, it's very hard to drive around to different community centers for different programs. It's really not feasible. So if we could take some of the budget that's currently allocated to something called the welcome policy, which provides anyone who is low income up to $600 in free Parks and Rec programming, instead of giving them that money, we should send instructors for different kinds of programs right into the neighborhoods. And the neighborhood that we serve in, actually, they have their own swimming pool. So the kids could actually have swimming lessons, but a lot of the kids in the community can't swim, even though there's a pool there, because swimming lessons are inaccessible to them. So investing in the children is definitely one of the pieces. And then you have to have really good mentoring programs, studying after school programs, and then good job opportunities, apprenticeships, chances for these kids to find their value and place to contribute into the world. I think someone said to me, the thing that everyone needs the most is to be needed. And so we need for these kids to find what part of this world will they be needed in. And if they can find that, I think they won't be lured into a gang.
Yeah, you're what you're talking about is something that's a very important underlying. I'm not a big fan of using the word investment. For me, it's more about matching people with services and opportunities. Sometimes I think people always attribute it to cost when it's just about organizational questions that need to be answered, as opposed to big large this idea that we have to throw large gobs of money at problems. Sometimes it's just a little bit of thinking, a little bit of head scratching, and as I said, matching people, services, and opportunities. And I think crime is obviously a big part of that. Is that if you have a youth who find it easier to make X amount of money committing a crime and not realize that they could make as much money and make it every day, every week, and maybe even,
Hmm.
develop some self image, that's the other thing, that, opportunities are important. And you believe, from what I'm hearing from you, is that culturally speaking, a job or feeling self-worth is not that expensive to create.
Well, actually, I think it is expensive.
Really?
Yes, but I think it's important. So if I look at, we talked about the Head Injury Resource Center, they have a very um, low, like the ratio of worker to client is very low. So versus if you go into a community, low income community, the ratio is very high. There's a lot of people, and I've talked to some social workers. Their caseloads are 30 families. How can you move the dial for 30 families? That's impossible. So I really want to make sure that we invest, and I think this is an important investment. But and I'll give you an example. So, if we know that there is, let's say a single mom with 3 kids, and she is struggling, and if she's not supported very well, uh, then in 20 years, those 3 kids now need support. So it multiplies exponentially the amount of investment that is required. And so, yes, I don't like to say investment because it's not just a monetary thing. Actually, more important than money, it's relationship. People need people in their life, people who believe in them, who will cheer them on, bridge them to resources. A lot of people who live in poverty actually also have a poverty of network, because when you think about working and being part of society, part of it is building your network. The bigger network you have, the easier it is to find a job. But when you're in life is in struggle and poverty, sometimes your network is limited, and so really it takes a community. It can't just be professionals who are investing. It has to be the community has to also rise up and be part of the solution.
Can we talk about the Centerpoint Mall reassessment for more housing?
Mhm. The megapolis, that's what I call it.
Let's talk about the megapolis then.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's an intensive development that is being proposed, and, obviously, it's probably gonna take years for it to happen, but, I believe there are multiple condos being proposed and, with a large park, and, and the future potentially a future subway and bus hub. So I think it's important. Everyone is saying that housing is very important, and we need to keep building housing right now. So it's very hard for people to be against more housing, unfortunately, even though for us, we recognize that our infrastructure is extremely stretched. It's hard for us to uh, fit more people in our community. We don't have enough daycare spaces. We don't have enough community spaces, and and meanwhile, the more buildings we build, the more people who are going to be here.
Uh,
So it's going to be a really big impact. And one thing that I have recently added to my platform is what I would really like to improve or make sure happens is I would like to be able to retain no frills, because I think that's one of the things that people are most worried about. No Frills is a very important lower cost grocery store in our neighborhood. We used to have a food basic that was walkable to a lot of people that was demolished with a development at Cummer and Young. So that means that everybody has to go to No Frills. And, I started a food bank last year, and No Frills is where we buy our fresh food. So that No Frills is really important to our community. The challenge is when a condo is built, suddenly the land, obviously, or the rental becomes much more expensive. So that's why, oftentimes you'll get a very expensive grocery store like Whole Foods or Longo's. But to so many people in our neighborhood, including seniors, low income families, No Frills is an important part of our neighborhood. So I definitely want to negotiate with the developers when it comes to where we have to negotiate the scope of these projects, that we negotiate a favorable rent for No Frills to stay in our community.
when we talk about our community and it's getting older, and you were talking about your parents, and I liked I know the one thing that you want for seniors is walk audits. Tell us a little bit about a walk audit and other things like that that you can push forward to help seniors.
Yeah, so we there's a buzzword these days at City Hall, which is active transportation. Active transportation includes walking and biking, anything that gets people out of their cars. And so for seniors, we really need a walkable community where they can get to the amenities that they need. And we take for granted when we walk that we can get to where we're going without falling. But and for seniors, a fall is a huge risk for them. So I did a mini walk audit the other day with a senior named Betty, and it was shocking to me some of the rough territory that she had to traverse. I didn't even realize some of the sidewalks were sloped. So if you have a sloped sidewalk and you're in a walker, that is very hard to navigate. And so we need to have regular walk audits to make sure that our sidewalks can be friendly for our seniors to be safe, to do the things they need to do to stay active, which is an important part of maintaining their health.
Yeah, we can step over something. When you're pushing a walker, you literally can't step over it. You've got to go.
Mhm.
So there are a lot of challenges that we don't understand. So it's nice that you're concerned with seniors. What other concerns do you have for seniors? You know, one of the main things that people talk about now is taxes, seniors, their children leaving the home. But you know, even when one of them passes away, one of them remains in the house alone, managing and being able to have that home and maybe even use the home, invite people, students, people like that into the home to rent. How do you feel about all that? That's part of the new wave of shrinking, you know, the empty spaces that we have throughout a community like Willowdale, which is very dense.
Mhm. So actually, NeighborLink North York, the charity that I currently am executive director at, years ago, we did a study with Seneca College to examine a partnership to help single moms be matched single moms with seniors, so that single moms could live in better neighborhoods and seniors could get some support. We were never able to get that program off the ground, but I think it's worth looking at and revisiting because I talk to many single moms who don't want to live in low income housing. They want to live in more mixed communities. And so that is a program that I think would be worth championing and trying to get seniors to be able to stay in their homes, but with company and support. And it's really a win-win with the right support mechanisms.
Yeah, it requires making good matches, right?
That's right.
But one thing I've learned about programs like that is that yes, when you start them up, there's issues that come up, but once you start figuring out a safe path, it can be replicated rather easily.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and also, community centers are not just for families, they're for seniors too. And, talking about Centerpoint Mall, the food court is a huge senior gathering place at Centerpoint Mall. So, when we look at that construction, we have to make sure that there is a corresponding space that is created and developed that seniors can also hang out, have food, and share life together. So that's something we have to make sure doesn't leave when Centerpoint is demolished.
I'm trying to think. I think that's where I got my haircut recently. That question. My last haircut was there. Yes, it's a very dense community. There's lots going on there where they really want to make the community even more dense. We've talked about that, and I wonder, you know, as a person who considers themselves a community mobilizer, you know, as you run for this Ward 18 in Willowdale. Tell me a little bit more about your platform and other issues that you'd like the voters to know that you're proposing and want to pursue.
Well, the number one thing that I want to change in Willowdale is to build a more connected community. So we know that, what I was describing, people don't know their neighbors anymore, and we're concerned about crime. And if you've ever talked to a police officer, they'll say the number one thing you can do to increase safety is to know your neighbors. So I want to build these small scale digital clusters like there used to be Neighborhood Watch with those stickers on the window. We need to recreate that. And it can happen in clusters of 10 to 20 houses. You simply reach out to your neighbors. It takes one champion, and it could be on WhatsApp, it could be on Facebook Messenger, or it could be an email chain. But knowing your neighbors, being connected to them, that's the start of building a connected community. And without that connectivity and engagement, it's really hard for us to make informed decisions because you need the voices of the community you're serving to be at the table for government to make good decisions. So it all is connected, but it starts with us knowing our neighbors, being invited to belong and to contribute to the neighborhood. And then that way, whenever we have decisions to make, we're able to tap into what the community is thinking, seeing, and feeling. And I think that will help us solve all the other problems that we need to fix, including speeding on our streets, noisy mufflers, traffic, and lack of infrastructure. These are all things that take a collaborative effort that is dependent on a connected community.
A lot of balls to juggle. She's Lily Cheng. Lily, thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
It's been a great pleasure, Frank. Thank you
And
so much.
then my best wishes on running it for Ward 18, Willowdale, and hope to see you again. Maybe after you're elected, you can tell us what you really got in the fire. Well, she's leading right now by a big 1%. So
Yeah, yeah.
that's just out from the start. So thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Frank. Maybe this podcast will help me gain a bigger lead.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure it'll at least double. I'm positive. Thank you for doing this. She's Lily Cheng. I'm Frank Stanishi. Thank you for watching Open Forum. It's always candid, frank, and live Thursdays at 4 p.m. This show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Network. For Open Forum, other news, entertainment, and sports programming we offer, please check out spanglishworld.ca. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. Thanks for watching, everybody. Until next time, I'm Candid Frank.